let's focus a bit on the regulation concerning this. We know that there were companies that were put on notice just recently that they were violating FDA rules by selling CBD products in drugstores nationwide. Where are we at in terms of regulation? What are you expecting for next year, Kyle?
Yeah, I think this is the issue when you have a state legal but federally illegal system. I think if the government can be more progressive about allowing high-grade producers, we operate entirely outside of the United States, and we're the second largest federally legal producer in the Western Hemisphere, but we can't enter the United States. That said, I think it's going to take some time. People are concerned about patient safety. They're concerned about the licenses being given out in the right way. But I think I'm optimistic. I don't think there will be any major movement in 2020, but maybe 2021. Is
the United States market important for you in the near future?
We certainly hope so. I mean, we're really focused on Europe right now. We're actually the largest landowner of any cannabis company in Europe. So the scale at which we're building is all being destined for places like Germany, maybe South Africa or the United Kingdom. But we obviously think the United States is a very big market and we'd love to enter, but we need to wait for the proper laws because we run a federally legal business.
Senator Daschle, let's turn to that. I mean, give me your sense here as to the likelihood of getting this federal legislation that so many of the producers are waiting for here in the U.S. Not 2020. Does a Democratic nominee who perhaps wins the presidency change the calculus at all, or does it matter?
Well, I think all of the presidential candidates on the Democratic side have now come out in favor of legalization. So I think if you have a Democratic administration and a Democratic Congress, you're going to see an accelerated schedule around legalization. I think descheduling is something that is growing in support. It's not only happening in the states. You now have over 70 bills in Congress that have been proposed in the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, who all favor some form of modernization of the regulatory structure. So it's going to happen. The question is time.
Why do you think it hasn't happened so far? I mean, you're looking in Colorado where recreational pot has been legal for some time, and business owners in this space that I know say they're being forced to turn to criminals because they can't deposit their money legally in a bank.
Well, of course, the Safe Banking Act passed the House now, and we're very excited about that. We hope that we can see the same result in the Senate sometime soon. There is a growing realization that we've got to do this, and I think it's just taking time. There's been conflicting information. A lot of people come into this with a mentality that the war on drugs was something we really had to adhere to. That's changing, but as it changes, people are becoming more realistic about how we change it.
Kyle, obviously there's some urgency here. There's so much capital thrown into this industry before there was clarity on the regulatory side. And I wonder just exactly what this industry might look like, even if you do get decriminalization, you have some rationalization of the regulatory structure, because it doesn't seem necessarily like that's automatically going to mean, higher prices and better margins and even greater usage, right? I mean, it could just mean prices go down because there's a lot more supply.
I think it's very interesting, and I think, despite us being one of the largest producers in the world, our business is really about supplying other businesses to fulfill their products. And I think what you've seen with the pullback in valuations are that, people are waking up to the fact that it's probably not the most efficient to grow cannabis in Canada. It might be more efficient to grow it in Colombia or Portugal and be supplied by a company like Cleverly. So I think it's going to create a spreading of the industry. There'll be branded companies, there'll be producers like us, specialists in extraction. That happens in every industry in the world, but for some odd reason in cannabis it hasn't occurred yet, and I think the next couple of years that will begin to occur.
When you look at a company like Tilray, last year its stock price hit a high of around $145. I checked this morning, it was 17 and change. It's a pretty steep drop-off. Are there lessons that you're paying close attention to with the other publicly traded companies for your own company?
Absolutely. I think one of the key lessons is don't do everything. Pick a focus, pick a lane, be the best at something, and we think being a low-cost, sustainable producer is sort of our competitive advantage. I'd say the other is, focus on profitability. We'll be cash flow positive sometime next year, and that way we don't have to depend on the capital markets to run a business. So I think those are two of the biggest lessons that we have.
I want to come back to this idea of federal legalization. I mean, what is your sense as to when, if we get that, what it will really mean for the marketplace?
Well, I think what it does is clarify the marketplace dramatically, and that's really what we're looking for. Descheduling cannabis is probably the single most important thing we can do from a policy perspective to create the market and create the kind of confidence you need to allow commerce to grow and to develop in all 50 states, not just the 30-some states that have now legalized it. So I think that's the key. And there's a realization that there are health benefits that we really can explore far more effectively if we have the green light to do the research necessary. So that is really one of the motivating factors now in making this happen.
Right, I'm aware that it's very difficult to even do research to understand sort of what the benefits are and or not of certain products.
Exactly.
Senator Daschle, you served in the Senate during Bill Clinton's impeachment. I got to ask what you make of the news on Capitol Hill. We had news this morning that Nancy Pelosi may delay sending over the articles of impeachment. Give us your sense of the import of this matter.
Well, I don't think there's anything more important for governance and for any democratic republic than to go through this process in the most thoughtful and reasonable way. Obviously, we did experience it 20 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. But I think the lessons learned is that we've got to find ways to bring the country back together once this has been completed. I don't think there's any question Speaker Pelosi will turn over the articles probably right after the first of the year. I think they're waiting to coordinate with regard to the Senate and how they're going to proceed with impeachment. But clearly, we've got to get this behind us and move on.
Do you really think we can bring the country together? I know it's easy to say that, but the partisan divide seems so deep that it's hard for some people to imagine.
It is hard to imagine at this point. We've had divisive times before, and we've gotten through them. You know, we can look back through history. It takes leadership. It takes a new understanding of the circumstances we're facing. Sometimes it's an external threat that brings us together. 9/11 is a good example of that. That brought us together very rapidly. Let's hope it's not a 9/11 that brings us together the next time. But nonetheless, I think leadership is really key to making it happen. And even though it's hard to understand, and you're right, it's so much easier to talk about than to do, we've got to find a way to do it.